Normality of the nervous system. Ah, welcome to the recording. I guess we forgot to start the recording on time. Um, I'm giving a brief history of the universe and of the world, and commenting that stress causes a selfish outlook, causes suffering and a search for freedom. And all these because of the influence of stress on the nervous system. So what do I mean by stress? I mean an overload of experience, an experience that's so intense that it overloads the capacity of the mind to process it. And that overload causes some deadening of the nervous system here and there. It's very much like the uh, operation of a circuit breaker in a house. If there's an electrical overload, a circuit breaker opens up, and that opening up prevents the passage of the electricity. So it prevents the heating from continuing to the point where a fire might start. So the whole purpose of a circuit breaker is to prevent the functioning of the electricity so that a fire won't happen. And the whole purpose of stress in the nervous system is to prevent the attempt to process sensory input when we have an overload of experience to protect us from deeper damage. But unfortunately, the deadening of the nervous system, or in the analogy, the turning off of the electricity, doesn't allow the normal functioning to occur. So what we have to do is remove the problem. In the case of the house, we remove the overload of electricity, the short circuit, and then we reset the circuit breaker. In the case of a human being, we get enough deep rest so that the nervous system can repair itself. Rest at night, the sleep and dreaming states, usually is deep enough to eliminate many of the stresses from our day, but there are always a few stresses that are just a little too intense for sleep and dreaming to eliminate them. And for that, we need transcending. Transcending is the fourth state of consciousness. And that eliminates not only today's stresses, but some of the stress from the past. So we're lucky to have found transcending. Not everyone is lucky. I'd say out of the 7.3 or 4 billion people on Earth, about 0% have found transcending so far. But we shouldn't let that get us down, because if it's valuable and if people discover that it's valuable, then it will become better known and more people will do it. So we just have to make sure that, and already the TM organization has done quite a bit of scientific research. So that part has been done. So I think that the future looks bright. It's just that when you're trying to solve a problem that has 7.3 billion pieces, it takes time to solve that problem. But on an individual level, it doesn't take much time at all. A few minutes of instruction, and the person begins to enjoy life more. Now, one interesting thing about stress, because it deadens parts of the nervous system, is that it leads to incurring more stress. So it's like a rolling snowball that gets larger and larger. The more stress we have, the more quickly we acquire stress. And many people show extreme examples of stress, with criminal behavior being an example, and many other kinds of examples. So it's really important that we do something about stress. And we now have something that we can do that's very practical in its nature. Freedom from stress is possible and can be said to be the goal of religion, philosophy, psychology, and psychiatry. Ancient Vedic religion and philosophies developed methods for refining consciousness. The refining of consciousness in our terminology is pretty much the same thing as the elimination of stress. It's done through a very deep state of rest in which we don't lose alertness. The spiritual traditions of India advocated ethics, kindness, and other personal qualities considered to be positive in nature. Much of yoga, for example, is guidelines for good behavior. The first two limbs of yoga, yama and niyama, are that kind of advice. But yoga goes on to talk about dhyana, which is transcending, and samadhi, which is the goal of transcending, the elimination of stress in which we experience unbounded peace and unbounded happiness. Now, all of these spiritual traditions that taught the methods for having a better life publicly talked about good behavior, but in private, they all had initiations in which specific mental techniques of meditation were taught. So this includes Maharishi's Shankaracharya tradition and Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj's Inchagiri Navnath tradition, and Swami Vivekananda's Ramakrishna order. All three of those and many other spiritual traditions had private techniques for quick evolution of spiritual life and the accomplishment of higher states of consciousness. As you all know, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought the main Shankaracharya technique out to the world starting in 1955 as Transcendental Deep Meditation, subsequently renamed to Transcendental Meditation. Near his death, he stated his goal as, quote, live long the world in peace, happiness, prosperity, and freedom from suffering. That is his inheritance that he gave us. TM reached a pinnacle of success with the endorsement of the Beatles in 1967, and TM has been taught to about 6 million people, according to the Associated Press. Don't know if that's an exaggeration or not, but it is possible. TM has always had minor problems, but on April 24th, 2024, a federal judge granted a class action status for a lawsuit against the Board of Education of Chicago and the David Lynch Foundation. And TM organization has had some previous history of getting in trouble with the law, with the famous New Jersey ruling that ruled that TM was a religion. I think that this is one of the prime examples of the failing of the Transcendental Meditation Organization to be true to the lofty goals of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as he very clearly expressed them during his lifetime. The International Teachers of Meditation Association, ITMA, was founded in 2022. And this organization I view as being key to the future progress of transcending in its instruction. The the first really complete teaching course of ITMA was April to September of 2023 by Zoom, and 15 September to 15 November 2023 in Kochi, India. The next course is planned for 15th of April 2025 and probably will be held in Bulgaria with a Zoom component that precedes it by 2 months. So what is our shared mission in ITMA? It's offering effective meditation to everyone on Earth with the goal of reducing world and individual stress, selfishness, injustice, suffering, and war, and in its place, offering lasting peace and happiness for everyone. It sounds lofty, but it's also very simple and basic and achievable through the elimination of stress from each individual nervous system. While effective meditation reduces and eliminates personal stress, it also promotes higher states of consciousness. These states are not mystical, but actual transformations of body and mind. The fourth state is Turiya. This state is described in depth in the Bhagavad Gita and the Mandukya Upanishad. This state leads to temporary pure awareness, transcendental consciousness, or samadhi, all are synonyms for the simplest state of consciousness, which is blissful and satisfied in itself and realizes itself as the one consciousness. We all think we're individuals. We think we're individual minds and bodies. But in this process of discovering the self, we discover that we're not so cut off from everyone else, that we're all actual parts, apparent parts of a whole consciousness. In fact, the only consciousness that exists. The fifth state of consciousness is self-realization. This is where pure awareness is never lost, even during dynamic physical or mental activity. And what's interesting about this is that all of life becomes as effortless as the transcending practice itself. No more effort. Problems may come up, yes, but we don't respond to them with effort. We respond to them with simple observation and whatever happens naturally. It's such a simple state that it can hardly be described. The sixth state goes beyond the fifth state by revealing subtle sensory perceptions. So there's nothing new in the sixth state in terms of the actual consciousness, the actual awareness. It's still simply full awareness. But now sensory perceptions are increasing. And the seventh state goes beyond the sixth state by revealing the absolute pure awareness as the recognition of the unity of inner and outer experience. So instead of seeing the inner and the outer, the absolute and the relative, the objective and the subjective as being extremes or different from each other, we finally see them as being actually just all one thing. And that is seeing reality the way it really is, something that we haven't done before because of the impact, the tremendous impact of stress on our ability to perceive and to think. All of these states of consciousness are available to every human being by learning and practicing effective meditation. And that is the talk, as short as that. I hope it was seen to be short. Certainly seemed to be to me. Anyway, I'd like to now turn to questions and answers. So if you have a question, you don't have to raise your hand, just start speaking and be sure to unmute yourself.
I have a question. So what is the research on the brainwave activity for people who are practicing the natural stress relief technique? Is it completely similar to what people experience with their effortless deep meditation?
Well, by definition, yes, because NSR is an effortless deep meditation. But the real question is whether it's the same as the research that's done on transcendental meditation. And that question is complicated by the fact that NSR is rather new as compared to transcendental meditation. And so, and also, not only is it new, but it has a low course fee, a course fee of $47. And because of these two reasons, there really isn't very much research as yet on NSR. So the founder of NSR was Dr. Fabrizio Coppola in Italy, and he did some informal EEG readings on himself and some friends. And his readings seemed to be similar to some published research of TM, but it was very superficial, certainly not the in-depth research that has been done about brain waves. There are also some exaggerations in the statements of the research by the TM organization and by MIU. One of these exaggerations is the growth of coherence across the scalp, that is, across the brain. And my own research in EEG, conducted in 1973, was in isolating individual alpha waves. And I noticed in doing that research that the individual wavelets of alpha waves are always completely synchronized across the scalp. There is no departure from synchronization that can be measured. And I discussed this with the head of research of the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut, where I did this work. And he said, well, the reason is very simple. The alpha waves are generated by a cluster of cells located at the base of the brain and conducted throughout the scalp by the major blood vessels. So there's no way you could have anything other than complete coherence. So the question arises, why then does the TM organization say that there's increased coherence in the alpha waves? And the answer is that they do a mathematical analysis. They're not measuring the actual wavelets in any particular frequency range, but they're doing a very sophisticated mathematical analysis so that if there are more alpha waves happening in the total picture of brain waves, then there's more coherence because the alpha waves are inherently coherent. So even though, so let's say, I don't know, if you combine all of the rest of the wavelengths of brain waves that are detected, what you basically have is a random electrical signal. And that random electrical signal has no coherence from point to point across the scalp because of its randomness. But then if you add to that the alpha wavelengths that are inherently coherent, the mixture of incoherent and coherent gives you a certain degree of coherence mathematically. So I think that the reason that they're drawing this conclusion is a purely mathematical one, that they're seeing more power in the more coherent parts of the brainwave spectrum in meditators. And because of that, there appears to be more coherence, but it's not a true coherence of the neural functioning in any way. It isn't that the brain cells are firing in synchrony with each other. If that happened, we would cease to be thinking useful thoughts. The intelligence would be lost because the synchronization would result in a much simpler wavelength uh, firing pattern that doesn't convey information. So the brain is a very complex organism and functions locally throughout the entire brain in many different places, millions, billions of little places that all interact in some way, shape, or form. Is that a answer?
Thank you.
Could you just explain a little bit more about the last point? Um, so, if I was understanding that correctly, you don't want to have maximum coherence all the time, or did I misunderstand that?
Yes. If you put an electrical oscillator inside of a pile of jello and you put electrodes on the surface of the jello, you will detect a periodic waveform because that's being generated by the oscillator. But it will have complete coherence in space all around the surface of the gelatin. And it's obvious that there's no intelligence in a simple oscillator. So if the brain functioned as a simple periodic waveform, highly coherent throughout space, that would be a proof that there's absolutely no intelligence present.
So then the benefit to the coherence during meditation is because it gives the brain a rest, or what is the advantage of the coherence during meditation? Or well, actually, you're saying the coherence is due to more alpha. Is that so? The
Yeah,
benefit alpha?
it's just a theory. I don't really know for sure because um, MIU didn't really want to discuss this with me. I've contacted Dr. Travis, and he was not interested in talking about that. He just loves his mathematics. He relies on it, and he thinks that it is a good reflection of what's going on. Uh, and that's fine, and it may be. I really don't know. All I can say is that coherence by itself is not an indicator of anything. Also, I'll point out that the brain waves that you pick up from the scalp are a random combination of millions, if not billions, of neurons. So you're right away swamping out uh, much much of what may be going on in the brain just by measuring on the surface. There are other kinds of measurements that are much more accurate, such as functional MRI and squid devices. And these techniques allow you to pinpoint a place inside the brain and look at how it's functioning. So, and when we do that, what we find is neural trains. We find trains of spikes. And what those spikes mean, they don't mean anything locally. They mean something in terms of the slightly larger area where a number of neurons are working together and collected by the synapses so that they potentiate connections inside the brain. It's these connections that constitute the intelligence of the brain. And the analogy with artificial intelligence is a very strong one. In artificial intelligence, there's a model of what goes on in a nervous system of a human or an animal, and and they tend to behave very similar to animals or to humans. I didn't do the research myself, but I was a computer programmer in a lab that researched the eyesight of a cat. They put an electrode into the cortex, into the visual cortex of the cat, and moved it around to locate individual neurons, and then analyzed the signals. So they found out that inside the brain, for example, there's a place in the brain that looks only at bars of motion of light that move in a particular angle. So this is the way artificial neurons work in AI, that there are individual features that are measured, and then they're combined together to get larger and larger analyses of what's going on.
I'd like to ask you something, David. Do you hear me?
Yes, Roland, I hear you very well.
Okay. First of all, thank you for your very interesting talk. And when you're talking about these various so-called states of consciousness as they seem to evolve during one's history of meditation, if one takes a couple of years or so. It sounds so easy and simple and natural. It's sort of surprising to me because often I've been asked, well, to get what popularly said to be getting into enlightenment, it takes years because it sounds so outspaced to get into. Well, transcendence is already easy to understand, and but the fifth and the other states of consciousness. Can you elaborate on this kind of naturalness and easiness?
Yes, well, actually, underneath every thought that we have, underneath every experience that we have, is pure awareness. And it doesn't take any effort or special technique to experience that. All you have to do is be observant, be observant of the fact that you're observing a computer screen, you're observing the walls of your room. You have these observations. Now ask yourself the question, who's doing the observing? Now, if you're honest with yourself and you look for an answer, who is doing this observing, you find a surprisingly spacious state that really can't be put into words. But you're not just your body. And you're not just your mind, you're also this awareness, and this awareness is unbounded. It doesn't have boundaries. It doesn't have boundaries in space. It doesn't have boundaries in time. It doesn't have likes and dislikes. It has none of the characteristics that we expect of human beings. And yet it's us. Are we inhuman? No, we're awareness. Awareness is our fundamental nature. And it's that awareness that our mind is led to in transcending. In transcending, we may start with something concrete in the mind. We may start with a particular sense of perception. The common one is the sensation of hearing. So we start with hearing something subtle, and then that attracts our attention, and we start finding it interesting, and we start finding it enjoyable, and we start finding that it's leading us inside. And where is it leading us? Not to some happiness in the sense of solving problems or having better relationships, the way we usually define happiness. It leads us to pure awareness. Pure awareness, there's not much you can say about it. It's so simple. It's so natural. But that's it. The more we experience pure awareness, the more the mind will shake off the stresses, dissolve the stresses. So yes, deep rest is part of it, but it's not just the deep rest of sleep where you have no experience. And it's not the deep rest of dreaming where you have illusory experiences. And it's not awakening, the waking state in which you have these persistent dreaming experiences, but it's something different. It's pure awareness, and that is consciousness. That is the one thing that actually exists, and it's not far away. Anyone can experience it. There are so many pointers that non-dual teachers have that they can give you. There's a non-dual pointer. Be aware of being aware. So simple, and yet it works. Instantly it works. Temporarily it works. Now, what we want with transcending is we want permanent higher states of consciousness. We don't want a temporary experience of peace and happiness. We want peace and happiness 24 hours a day. And that's what we get starting in the fifth state of consciousness by eliminating stresses. So transcending is a more satisfying path than simple duality, Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta is a fine philosophy, but in terms of a practice, the practices are hit and miss. They're basically pointers to point to pure awareness, whereas transcending is a very repeatable experience that anyone can have that works each time you do it. Now, the experiences you may have will be different from time to time. Sometimes you will have peace and happiness, yes, but other times you will have misery and discomfort. Why? The answer is that part of what makes transcending so wonderful is that it actually dissolves the stress. And when a stress, which was caused by an overload of experience, is dissolved, there's some of that experience that's relived as it dissolves. And that part of the experience that's relived is part of the discomfort of the experience that originally caused that stress. So let me make that more concrete. Suppose when you were 9 years old, you were almost hit by a car. You feel scared, fearful, and that created a stress in your nervous system. And perhaps for a few years after that, you had nightmares. You had flashbacks about the fear that you had when the car almost hit you. No damage was done to your body, but you had an overload of experience. Later in life, you learn transcending, and in one meditation session, some of that stress starts to be dissolved, and you get a side effect of a feeling of fear. And so this discomfort, this feeling of fear that happened, the explanation for it is side effect of release of stress. So in transcending, you have an inward stroke of transcending in which the mind is attracted to pure awareness through the object of perception, in this case, perhaps hearing. And in the outward stroke, the body rids itself of that stress, and you have the experience of stress release. And that could be all sorts of different, hundreds of different types of experiences. The most common one, though, is thoughts. So thoughts during meditation are an indication of the release of stress.
May I ask you something connected
Please.
with that 7 states of consciousness? Would you agree, or could you explain a bit that maybe those different states are not establishing in a neat and orderly way, but maybe they're islands of experience of a 7th state, and sometimes 4th, and sometimes 5th. And it's not like a plain, stable state which is there always.
Yes, that's very good. The main stable state is the 5th state, what is called self-realization. And once that becomes permanent, it really is permanent, because there's no more stress in the nervous system that would pull you back to pain and suffering. But you're right, the transition to higher states of consciousness is not always in that simple, orderly way. It's through experience here and experience there. And gradually you have more and more experiences. The 7th state is a kind of a platform where you, in the 6th state, there are all sorts of different subtle experiences, but in the 7th state, it all comes together, and you really rest in this unity consciousness. And then there are further states after that, but they're very difficult to describe, and they vary from person to person. And they're under the influence of each person's nervous system, each person's background, each person's pattern of stresses.
Do you know people with established higher states of consciousness?
Probably, but it's impossible to tell somebody's state of consciousness. And it's frequently difficult to tell your own state of consciousness as well.
Yeah.
But if you go by the basic criteria of lasting peace and happiness, you know whether you have lasting peace and happiness or not. And you see it more and more as you practice transcending. So those of us who have been practicing transcendental meditation for many, many years, and I think that's probably roughly half the people in this room, if not more, we know that life has become easier, that problems don't seem to overwhelm us as much as they did at the beginning.
Well, I think in general it's true, but I'm meditating almost 50 years, and I think there are still phases of really experiencing heavy problems and suffering. Maybe I'm not so much involved as I used to be years ago, but I still experience it.
So you're speaking about activity as opposed to during meditation?
I don't know if I understood you properly. Could you?
So are you speaking about your experience inside meditation or
No,
outside of meditation or
outside.
both?
Outside.
Outside.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but those problems are there and they may cause you. All right, let me take a concrete example
Mm-hmm.
from my own life. When I was growing up, every once in a while, I would say, would be overcome by a fear of death. I would picture in my mind very clearly not existing. And it was a very strange state to me. And it was very disturbing. It made me fearful.
Mm-hmm.
As my meditation time has gone forward, I've found that no longer happens. But in a more concrete way, I have been faced with my own mortality. For example, when I received a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer, it's hard to hear a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer and not understand it as a possibility of dying in the near future, because that is involved with that kind of diagnosis. But I felt no fear. And this was strange because I had so much fear growing up when I didn't have any experiences. I never almost got hit by a car. I had some traumatic experiences as a child, but I didn't have experiences that threatened my life. So, but nevertheless, the stresses that I had expressed themselves as a fear of death. And now I seem to have lost that fear of death. So in 2016, 2017, when I received this diagnosis and then had to go to the hospital for extended stays for a couple of surgeries and for radiation and for chemotherapy, I enjoyed all of that. I found it a great adventure. I remember this one time when I was recovering from a surgery, and it was I had a roommate, shared my room with someone else, with another patient, and he had a problem with the circulation of blood in half of its body, left half or right half of his body was not getting enough blood flow, and it was affecting his decision making and all sorts of things about his life. And so he was put in a bed. The alarm was turned on the bed so that he could not get out of the bed without causing an alarm. So at 3 a.m., I hear this alarm going off, and it seems he's trying to get out of bed because he has in his mind that he wants to get a St. Patrick's Day dinner. So he's going to leave the hospital and get a dinner. That's what he wants to do. And so all of these nurses and people are rushing through my room to get to his part of the room and deal with that situation. And I'm lying there just immensely entertained. It's like watching a TV show. And I just enjoy all of the people rushing back and forth and trying to deal with this crazy guy who's not behaving himself. So that example, it's showing that not only has my fear of death been eliminated, but it's just gone. It's now I can experience being in the hospital as an adventure, as something fascinating and different and enjoyable. There was pain at times, and I suffered from the pain. I hated the pain. I wanted. Sometimes I needed pills to take care of the pain, but there was a detachment there. There was a detachment where I wasn't really involved in it. Part of me was involved, and I just observed that part, and it didn't really affect me. The point I'm trying to make is that the definition of me changes.
Mhm.
Instead of identifying yourself with the mind and the body and with your suffering and with your problems and with your relationships and with your parents and with your children and all of these aspects of life that vex you, you let go of all of that and instead identify with pure awareness, which has no problems. It makes no sense to someone who hasn't experienced it, but we are starting to experience this through transcending. And it's a wonderful thing, and it's reproducible. It's repeatable from one person to another person to another. It does take time because each person has a certain amount of stress that they've accumulated in their nervous system.
David, thank you. I'm coming up on 50 years of meditating and approximately 45 years of being a TM sitter. You alluded to something before. I know that when I close my eyes, the mantra comes, and we start the mantra to lose the mantra. And I reach a point where there's nothing to do. You know, there's no effort at all. And in my daily walks, I'm listening to podcasts that talk about non-duality and the pathless path, and and just close one's eyes, and there's nothing to do. And I'd like for you, if you want to maybe speak to this.
I'm not sure what the question is.
I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the pathless path, non-duality, that there's no technique needed. And you mentioned something before about, all we have to do is just be, just to observe. And I thought maybe you would want to comment on that or not.
Sure. And there are non-duality teachers like Tony Newman. I mean, what's his name? Jim Newman and Tony Parsons. These people.
Krishnamurti.
Well, no, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the uncompromising non-dualists. These are the people who say there's nothing to do, nothing to be, nowhere to go. You're already there. There's no such thing as enlightenment. This is Tony Parsons, Jim Newman, and their friends. Okay? I think it's nonsense. I think that what they're doing is describing the symptoms of a higher state of consciousness and making the absurd claim that it's available to everybody on earth instantly right now. It's not. You look around you and you don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. You see all sorts of counter evidence. You see criminality and so forth. I think they're making an intellectual mistake, and they're substituting intellect and abstract philosophy for reality, for a realistic philosophy. The realistic philosophy is we do have stress. We've accumulated this stress from a stressed world. And I hope I showed that it's from a stressed evolution that goes back thousands and millions of years. So there's a tremendous amount of stress there. And the individual can be free of stress, but somehow you have to get from here to there. And that's what a spiritual technique is for. It's for that transformation of body and mind, so that the body and mind are no longer important. Rather, our true nature of pure awareness becomes important. Now, you mentioned Rupert Spira, and there are others like Adyashanti and Muji who teach a modified form of non-duality. And this modified form basically says, spend some time finding out who you are, do some introspection. And I'm quite sympathetic to that point of view. It's just that it's not very effective. You can spend your whole life being frustrated with that because you can see that there's such a thing as pure awareness, but the technique doesn't lead you directly there. The so-called direct path is only valid as a temporary experience. It's not the path to the full self-realization, the fifth state of consciousness. The reason is it doesn't eliminate the stresses from the nervous system.
Mm.
In transcending, the way it works is that the finer state of perception offers greater joy. So as we transcend inward, the inward stroke of transcending, we're experiencing increasing joy. And that's what draws us in all the way to pure awareness, is that joy, a power that cannot be stopped. It's very different from an intellectual technique in which you say, who am I really? Something of that sort. It's just to start with the intellect. It's a few people are able to do that, but it's not effective for the majority of humans. Transcending is. And this is what's so wonderful about ITMA, that ITMA is training teachers of this wonderful technique that actually works, so that increasingly the world will be helped in a very real way, helped in a way that war relief, for example, just can't do. Humans spend so much effort trying to put Band-Aids on the problems of stressed people. The real solution is to eliminate the stress.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
I would like to ask you one more question, David.
Please ask as many questions as you like.
Yes. Yes, I'm tempted to ask you the first question I've got in the context of we have been discussing just before the characteristics of so-called higher or evolved states of consciousness. Now, the term higher and evolved already somehow it's hindering me to talk about normal states of consciousness the moment we are there. because it's indicating some sort of, oh, we are in a more higher state of being and we're looking at the past. But my question was more in the sense of, what's the role of humor in the various phases or modes of consciousness? The humor is it true that my cognition that the humor is such a mirror of easiness? Can you contemplate on this a bit or talk about that? The role of humor, because I'm reminded of this well-known Greek scientist Kanellakos. The older generation remember him. He was doing a research on the phenomenon of humor as a result of meditation.
Right. So there are two kinds of humor, just like there are two kinds of so many human activities. One kind comes from the stressed individual, and the other kind comes from pure awareness, the interaction of pure awareness and the individual. So a stressed person laughing at a joke, there's a little bit of relief felt in doing that. It's enjoyable. But it's very superficial as compared to a higher state of consciousness, a real transformation of the entire nervous system. And when the nervous system is transformed in that way, humor, even what is perceived by a stressed person as being only a little bit humorous, could be very profound. I'll give an example from Jerry Jarvis. How many people know Jerry Jarvis? Know the name? Yes, good. So I was once on a course, and Jerry Jarvis was there, and somebody said, "I see you're eating a chocolate bar. Isn't that supposed to be something that you're not supposed to do in TM?" And Jerry said, "I am testing this tamasic substance." Now, that's not rolling on the floor humor. There's nothing that most of us would find tremendously funny about it, but the people there just laughed and laughed at that because they were in a flexible state of the nervous system that resulted from all of the meditation that they were doing. So this is the role of humor changes, and whereas it may have been just an entertainment when we're filled with stress, it can become an expression of the playful nature of pure awareness. But humor doesn't cause the pure awareness. It's the pure awareness that causes the humor.
Uh-huh.
May I add something to that? David, maybe you and I were in the same room in Spain when there was a journalist that came to interview Maharishi, and she said, "Maharishi, are there any dangerous side effects to this practice?" And he blinked and he said, "Yes, it kills ignorance."
I was not there, I think, but wonderful story.
One more question from my side.
As
What
many
is-
as you like.
All right. It seems to be pretty clear to me, but still, on the other side, I hear some in my conversations with others, why do we need a mantra? And what is the characteristic of the mantra as it is being used in our context? And there are so many ranges of mantras that what's the correct, what is the mantra, what's the nature of the mantra we are using, that why it's happening, that it makes us transcending?
Okay, so we have to bear in mind that we have a general audience here, so I'm not going to get into aspects that a teacher might know. That we can discuss in a different occasion. But basically, the tradition of the mantra means a spiritual phrase, or it could actually be a very long spiritual phrase. Could be a whole shloka from a spiritual writing. So pundits chant the Samaveda, the Rig Veda, Atharva Veda, Yajur Veda, and many other different spiritual writings. And they do this for the development of consciousness, and they also do it for auspicious influence in the environment and all of this sort of thing. But I think you're talking about the process of transcending. Maharishi, in talking with us, said that there are 112 different ways of transcending using the senses of perception and the mind. So he has chosen one particular one, and I think that it for human beings, it probably is the best, the most effective. And this particular method is to use the sense of hearing. So the mantra can be defined as a meaningless sound whose effects are known. And what that means is that because it's meaningless, it doesn't keep the mind engaged in the superficial level of consciousness where meaning resides. So if we are, let's say, reading a book and thinking about the ideas that are being presented in the book, our mind is very active and it's working on a fairly superficial level. If we're meditating, the mind is being reduced in its activity so that it tends to disappear and get replaced by pure awareness, which is actually our true self, our true experiencer. So what does that is the natural tendency of the mind to enjoy subtler experience. And the mantra is an ideal way to do this because these mantras, these so-called bija mantras or seed mantras, are easy to forget. And because they're easy to forget, the mind can't hold on to them. They're slippery. It's like trying to hold on to a fish that keeps slipping out of your hand. So naturally, the mind moves from a very superficial appreciation of the sound of the mantra to a quieter appreciation of the sound. And as it does so, it's moving closer and closer to pure awareness because there's less and less interfering between our experience, which is in the mind, and the pure awareness, which is all that actually exists. So that apparent veiling of knowledge, that apparent veiling of reality that's caused by stress is a shortcut. We find a path through it by following our inner bliss as the mantra gets quieter and quieter and as it gets forgotten.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, I would like to ask one question about the brainwave relevance. For a long time, it has always been said that the brainwave pattern and the coherence, whatever it shows, is regarded as a measurement for developed consciousness, developed brain functions, and so on. Now, you, in the beginning, you told us something quite different. Do we still have the possibility to determine by means of the brainwave pattern in any point of our development how far we already went?
No, I'm afraid not. There's no way to measure how much stress we have in our nervous system. Theoretically, it should be.
Not even by
Theoretically, it should be possible.
So what they told us for years and years is just
it's a theory, and there's nothing wrong with making theories. The only evidence is the belief in it. I don't think that that's very good evidence. I believe in pure awareness because of the evidence of having experienced it clearly.
so then what happens with, for instance, with the TMCD program?
Well, in the TMCD program,
there was always statements that said, when you do the flying sutra, you have maximum, optimum, super brain coherence, and this develops your consciousness in a very, very fast way.
yes, Maharishi loved to bring. Maharishi loved to bring science into the conversation. He had an international symposium where he had Buckminster Fuller and he had Calvin Moores and many other people who were Nobel Prize winners. And it was a very exciting time. He cultured Larry Domash at first, and then later on other people to contribute physics understanding. And of course, John Hagelin has a physics background. So it's fine to bring science into this, but it's an analogy or a metaphor, and it's only meant to be some words that point towards pure awareness. That's all he meant it to be. Now, if I could say a few words about the TMCD program. So what happens in this program, for those of you who have not had that instruction, is that instead of just experiencing pure awareness through transcending, you then bring that pure awareness out into activity, so that the pure awareness and the activity coexist in a sense. And the activity becomes an expression of the pure awareness. It's an experience of profound bliss, because it feels like like the faintest desire that we might have is actually coming true. That's the feeling that I think can come from the TMCD program. Now, having said that, and for all of its effectiveness, more effective than TM, it also releases stress at a faster rate because of its increased efficiency. And because it's releasing stress at a faster rate, the side effects of misery and discomfort and unhappiness can come out as well. So there's good and bad that can be objectively said about various techniques. I think the wonderful thing about the basic transcending technique is that it's easily taught and it's effective enough to release stress at a rate that we can tolerate. Not such a fast release that it overshadows, that the side effects of stress release overshadow the peace and happiness that we gain from the technique. So I'm for people learning transcending and focusing on the transcending. I'm not in favor of these projects to set up a maximum number of people who are practicing the TM City program in order to affect the atmosphere within a particular geographic area. I think that there's a little bit of exaggeration going on there.
I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Please.
So you started the talk, you went through, well, you got up to the point of like these various organizations that the outward teaching is the morality, and then the inward teaching is a technique to, or some method of elevating consciousness. And then you also mentioned that it's very difficult to tell what somebody's state of consciousness is, somebody else's state of consciousness is. It can be hard to tell what your own state of consciousness is. Now, I'm not sure what the significance was of your mentioning the outward teaching of morality and the inward teaching, but what this raised for me was the thought of, there are, particularly among people who are teaching higher consciousness, sometimes their actions, sometimes they may engage in actions that appear either to reflect a poor judgment, not necessarily, lack of morality, but sometimes poor judgment, or in other cases appear to be possibly harmful to other people. And then, but then there's the issue of, well, can you discern someone's state of consciousness by their behavior? I have always found this to be very confusing, and I know it has caused a lot of difficulties in various organizations where students are either confused or sometimes are tying themselves up into a pretzel, trying to rationalize their feeling, oh, this person has a higher consciousness, but what is this? I can't make sense of this behavior or this decision, and what does it mean? And it creates a lot of problems, I think. And do you have any perspective on that, or is that something you're willing to, or
Yes, I've been involved in some of that myself. I'm a member of the ASI, the Association for Spiritual Integrity. And that organization is very concerned about abuse of students and abuse of spiritual teachers. So I will make the comment that all of that is in the field of the relative.
Mhm.
It's all in the field of the relative. If you get hung up in the field of the relative, you stop making progress. It's that simple. You want to make progress towards lasting peace and happiness, go towards pure awareness.
Mm.
That's where you'll find it.
But how about in terms of making a practical? Well, I mean, yes, that makes sense to me. But sometimes you do have to make decisions in the relative. And
Yes, and your
so,
decisions will be stronger the more evolved you are. So the less stress you have in the nervous system, the better your decisions will be, and the better the consequences will be, the better the karma will be for the world.
but for example, you formed this, you and I guess Rick and other people have formed this association. So you do have some concern in the relative about this.
Yeah, I have lots of concerns about the relative. I'm anti-war.
Yeah.
I'm a Quaker. I have many concerns, but I also feel that if I'm to be maximally effective, um, I have to eliminate my own stress before I attempt to eliminate the stress of everyone else.
Okay. Fair enough. The other question I had, do you, other than the reduced cost of the tuition, do you feel there's any special um, um, anything special about the what is it, NSR? Yeah. Anything that recommends it, especially over other techniques of transcendence besides the lower cost and the simplicity of the method? Is there anything else, like, or particularly in relation to TM, say, other than the more accessibility financially, do you find any other things that might be better about NSR?
Yes, thank you for asking. We've designed NSR so that it scales up. It can scale up to world level. And it's the only technique I know of that can scale up to the world level and maintain its effectiveness. So I think that's the primary advantage of it in the global scheme of things.
And what are the characteristics that make it uniquely able to scale up to world level?
It's a do-it-yourself course. So all we have to do is mail the course to someone, and they follow the instructions. It's 3 lessons, 6 lessons, 2 lessons a day for 3 consecutive days is the course. And they do it in their own home or in their place of business. And it seems to be equally effective for everyone. I've never had a failure of anyone to have some beneficial experiences such as peace or happiness, even in their very first lesson.
Thank you.
Yeah, now it's not a substitute for personal instruction. And I think that for those who can afford the high course fee of TM, I definitely recommend it. But for the vast majority of the human race, they can't afford that kind of money.
Thanks.
May I ask you one more question?
You may.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah. We are also accompanied by, let's say, by great thinkers and great founders of very powerful religious systems like Buddha, Christ, or Muhammad. And when we are talking about the this transcending meditation practice. We are kind of avoiding, or sometimes avoiding, to connect up with these people because it could bring some high complications. Is there, when you talk about your practice, in your practice of teaching meditation, does something come along in your practice? These kind of questions? And if, how do you elaborate on that?
No, I can't recall a single time in the past 17 or 18 years when someone wanted to talk about Buddha or Jesus Christ. Buddha and Jesus Christ didn't want to start a world organization. They just taught what they had discovered for themselves. And people listened. And in the case of Christ, the global organization didn't get started during his lifetime and for at least 100 years after his death. Other people started these religious organizations. I'm sure they had good motivations, but the early track record of Christianity was no better than any other religion, I think. I'm not really sure. I'm not an expert in that. But I'm not intending to start any world movement, and I don't think ITMA is trying to start a world movement. We're just responding to the call of our times. And the call of our times is incredible levels of stress, so that even our entertainment is filled with stress. Everything is filled with stress. When you go to school, you're taught to work hard and get good grades, and you're punished if you don't get good grades in a very, very real way for the rest of your life. There's tremendous stress. So our times call for this effective method of eliminating stress in a gradual way through 2 20-minute periods a day.
May I go back to a very simple, basic question? There are two ladies who want to be initiated by me, and both of them have got cancer stage 3. And they are in the middle of chemotherapy. And I wonder if it's a good moment to start, and how can we talk about experiences when their whole condition is influenced by the chemotherapy. And I guess you can answer it better than anybody else.
I don't know about that, but I've certainly known people who were taking strong medications and also practicing transcending.
Mm.
And yes, it does affect the nature of your experiences because it's an additional stress. So it causes additional discomfort during the practice. But discomfort doesn't mean effort.
Mm-hmm.
The inward stroke is effortless in transcending. The outward stroke is also effortless.
Mm.
So even if you feel that your mind is filled with thoughts, and they're thoughts of death, and they're thoughts of unwanted meaning of thoughts,
Mhm.
it's still just thoughts. They're still just sounds. They're still just side effects of stress release. And you don't have to pay attention to them. You don't have to get caught up in them. You don't have to abandon the meditation session and obsess over some topic.
Mhm.
So long as you're effortless in both the inward stroke and the outward stroke, transcending is successful no matter what is happening in the body or outside of the body. In my teacher training course in Spain, they were uh, they were demolishing a parking lot outside of my window in the hotel I was staying at. And they would drill holes and put dynamite in the holes and explode the dynamite so that, and they'd keep doing that during each afternoon for several days in a row. And so each time a dynamite stick went off, I was meditating, or maybe I was meditating 10 or 11 times a day at that point in my course. And I'd be brought up out very quickly out of a very deep state of rest by the explosions. And I knew what to do. I knew that this was just like a stress release, that all I had to do was continue to observe that discomfort in my body. And it would substitute for the mantra. It would be the way the meditation would be successful, would be to observe that feeling, even if it's a miserable and uncomfortable feeling. It's still a feeling, and it's exactly the same in nature as any other thought. And so if I could have, and I had wonderful experiences. At one time I had a brief experience of hearing a chorus of angels, and it just sounded so wonderful. But it was just some noise that got filtered through my nervous system. Um, and it was entertainment. So I accepted it. So yes, if somebody has a deep illness, they can still learn transcending. Yes, their attention may not be focused on the instruction, so it might take a little more time to do the instruction. You have to be flexible in teaching. If you're teaching a small child, you would teach very differently from an adult because they're not so clear about what a thought is, for example.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Another aspect might be that people in the later stages of cancer get morphine. That means you're practically meditating on drugs. What would you do with an aspirant or a student who comes to you and says, okay, my cancer is pretty much advanced. Sometimes I do have to take morphine or other painkillers, and the morphine is doing me, making me a little bit disorientated.
Yeah, so I would encourage them to look beyond the way the morphine is working. And the way you do that is the same as when you haven't gotten enough sleep. If you haven't gotten enough sleep and you meditate, you know it's a more superficial meditation. What does that mean, more superficial? It means that the stresses are releasing right away. So you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to let the mantra disappear. You don't have to, it might take 30 seconds for the mantra to disappear. You don't have to wait the 30 seconds. Just right away, just close your eyes and you're feeling miserable and uncomfortable. That's the stress that's happening as a result of the illness or taking medicine or whatever it is. And if you know how to transcend, you also know how to float on the surface. And floating on the surface just means being aware of that discomfort, just not being attached to it. And it can go on like that, so long as that, so long as the medicine is that powerful, it may prevent transcending. That is transcending deeply, but you can still transcend on the surface, and you'll be releasing stresses, and you'll be making progress.
I'd like to ask something personal here. David, you said you made a course in Lantiglia, but you were made a teacher in Fuji, Italy. And I know one person here, a friend of mine. His name is just with 72, 77, 55. Paul, not Paul, Bernhard Paul. Bernhard Paul, you've been in Fuji as well. And
there were about 3,000 of us there.
So it could not have been that Bernhard has crossed your way.
I don't think so, but I do remember one course that I was on in Northern California, where there was a guy there from Germany, and I had the most fabulous time with him. He had such a great sense of humor. We used to make fun of the leader of the course and different things, and uh, just you had to be there, but we had a lot of fun together. You make personal relationships on these courses, of course, yes, and you observe what's going on. You see people who are having heavy unstressing. You see them having many movements in their body. But you also see people having experiences of higher states of consciousness. You see all sorts of things in others and also in yourself. So courses are a wonderful place to evolve spiritually.
One more question. Can it be that there is a certain percentage of the people whom we think, or by whom it is said that these people, let's say 5 or 10%, when they begin to meditate, they get into unstressing problems in such an amount that it may not have been a good idea to initiate them?
Yes, I've encountered, I estimate it's 0.5% of my students have had uncontrolled unstressing from the very beginning. And I offer them a special program of consultation that is free because they didn't expect that this would happen. They expected that it would be all peace and happiness. So I give this support program for free. And while it's probably not appropriate in this forum to give the specifics of that program, it takes about a week or two, but I get them to the point where they're no longer having that uncontrolled stress release. And I believe that all transcending teachers should have been instructed in that, but they're not. But I learned from my own students how to handle that. I've learned how to handle panic attacks. And I've learned how to handle, I don't know how to think the mantra effortlessly. You know, there are people who come to meditation checks many times and they still say, I don't know how to think the mantra effortlessly. Well, I have come up with a way of teaching that. So I believe that we can learn from our students and that we should share what we've learned with other teachers. I think that's very important. I think it does not happen in the TM movement. In the TM movement, we only do what Maharishi said. We memorize the checking notes, we learn the initiation, and we just stick to that. And we're doing our students a disservice by being such poor teachers, by not gaining what we could gain in terms of learning from those of us who have had more experience.
From what I understand, it's been my practice that if people are beginning to meditate and they are in such a situation, then I shorten, I kind of give this program that they don't do 20 minutes, they just do 10 minutes or 5 minutes. But to compensate for the 20 minutes, I asked them to do the prana, some piece of pranayama and to do physical yoga exercises.
I think we should discuss specifics in a teachers only meeting, and that would be good. But in this meeting, I think it's not appropriate for us to go into teaching techniques very deeply. Is that okay?
It's okay. So to round it up, higher states of consciousness. As it's been my personal experiences that I've had now and then some very beautiful and very, very deep experiences. Let's say, just take one sample. I had a deep, deep experience of a blues, wonderful blues, not just the depressive blues, the song, the melody, type of music. And I once enjoyed very much Jimi Hendrix, for example, his kind of music. And somehow I had this very, very deep quality of blues happening within me. And it sort of put me on a level of I never sort of such a deep, 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 beautiful and wholeness of having this blues melody. I couldn't really, I'm not a musician, but I like music. Can it be that, this sort of experiences contribute to what you've been talking about, the summing up of the practical aspects of experiencing higher states or higher modes of consciousness?
Reminds me of October of 1971 when I started my teacher training, the main part of my teacher training. I went to 4 consecutive teacher training courses, and this was the beginning of the first one. And for the first, I think it was 2 weeks, Beatles tunes ran through my head all the time during the day, Beatles tunes. One tune would come maybe help. I need someone's help, not just anyone's help. And it would just fill me with enjoyment. And I could hear all of the melody and all of the harmony. And then maybe after an hour or so, I want to hold your hand, or some other tune would come. And that went on for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. And all of a sudden it just stopped. It was stress release. It was in the relative, it was stress release. And it was a good thing. And it was enjoyable, but it was just stress release. And we don't care about stress release. We don't care about the content. It could be a lot of fun, as the Beatles tunes were, and the blues. It could be a lot of misery. It could be that we remember some bad experiences from previous in our life. Doesn't matter. It's just stress release. And once it's gone, we have the opportunity to go further, to go deeper, to go more towards pure awareness. If anybody needs to leave, it's fine with me. I can continue here as long as you'd like me to.
Thank you, David. That was great. I'm on my way out. Take care.
Bye, Reed.
David, I'd like to thank you. It was a wonderful talk, and the questions especially were very interesting questions and answers. Maybe I'll make a few updates. Roland, maybe you help me about ITMA and about the next coming few months. Would you like to start, Roland, about New Zealand and anything else?
You're asking me, Abner?
Yes. Maybe we give a few updates on ITMA. You had some news about New Zealand, the legal things, and there are a few other announcements we can make for the upcoming winter.
Yeah. One point is that we didn't talk today about legal aspects, although most of us are aware of that we are all independent, or most of us are independent teachers. And so we have to observe some certain kind of legal aspects, and to name them, that they are trademarks and copyrights. And so we have to observe these aspects also in ITMA. And we have been given the information yesterday that it's 1 year almost ago that we have been addressed, some of us have been addressed by the lawyer of the TMO, and it caused quite some confusion. And so we were pretty concerned about that as well. But somehow we could settle that in a way that we explained that we are not, in future, we're not using material with copyrights. So, but now it's only 2 weeks ahead, then it will be 1 year. And once it's 1 year, then the whole thing is over. So we just whoever has been addressed, we just stay quiet if somebody is being addressed in these coming 2 weeks. Just don't worry and don't give any answer to anything, because it's a matter of being able to deliver the post of whatever lawyer somewhere in the world, in New Zealand or wherever it might be. So that's the message of the day as far as legal aspects are concerned.
Well, thank you, Roland. This is great news because quite a few members of ITMA were worried about it, and hopefully in 2 weeks that'll be no longer a threat. A few notes. We're planning the next teacher training academy, like David mentioned. It will be in the spring of 2025. We're preparing new sets of material, revised material. So it'll be basically edited and organized based on the experiences we had for the last course, so it should be more clear, more effective, easier to learn, and also without any chance of copyrights. It will be all ITMA materials, nothing from that we borrowed from someone else. I'll mention one thing that most of you know, that there's from people who learn from Maharishi, there's a big storm now because of discoveries about Maharishi's life, and some people have different opinions about that. In ITMA, we have the same like other places. Some people have strong opinions, don't want anything to do with Maharishi. Some are fine, and some are in the middle. So as ITMA, we feel this is a personal relationship between a student or a teacher and a master he chooses for himself, or a religion or a prophet he chooses for themselves. It's not our business. We are teachers of meditation, and we have no say or no advice. We don't have an ideology what you should think about Maharishi. We are what is important for us is the teaching, like David mentioned, should be accurate, should be effective. And that is what unites us, that we want to teach what we learned in the same way, in the same effective way. Now, towards the end of this year, in December, ITMA is a democratic organization. Every year we hold elections for the chairman. That's been Roland for the last 2 years, I believe, or a year and a half. And for the CEO, which is myself. And congratulations, Roland. You just celebrated your 82nd birthday. And you're the poster child for ITMA, because no one believes you're 82 years old with your energy. But in the small group that's the board of directors of ITMA, we're all getting on. And we thought this year also to elect, an assistant chairman or vice chairman, or an assistant CEO or deputy CEO, or something like that. So they could be part of the meetings, and they don't have to work very hard, but they should be getting all the information. And we hope that, in some time they will want to pick up this responsibility. Of course, people will elect them, because we very much encourage the new generation of teachers to do that. So when we hold the elections, there'll be these additional positions open for election, and I hope there are many candidates for them. One more thing we'll do in this when we vote. We have the ITMA bylaws. They're the DNA of the organization. like other organizations. This is not built around a master or a guru. It's a democratic organization run by the teachers. All the teachers are equal. They have equal votes. No one is more important than the other. No one is a Raja. No one collects money from the others. And this is all included in the bylaws of the organization. They're basically the Constitution. They take care of any possible question, how things should be decided, basically. And one of the points in the bylaws is if we want to suggest some minor changes in them from our experience of 2 or 3 years to make some little corrections there. But that means that we have to give the suggested changes a month in advance to all the teachers. And we would very much like your comments and maybe suggestions of yours, how we can improve the bylaws. And then in the elections, we'll also vote on those changes if they want them. That's about it. So Paul, why don't you wrap up this beautiful session? And thank you again, David, for this great talk and questions and answer sections. Is Paul
Yes.
with us? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, David, for your talk today. Thank you all for attending. It's wonderful to be with you all. Have a good evening and a good tomorrow. For some of you, it's almost tomorrow. Jai Gurudev.
All right, Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. It was nice to be here with you.
Yes.